Thought you might like to see how I go about photographing my furniture, so I'm going to go through the photographing of this sideboard buffet. The first thing I had to do was roll down my backdrop. Now I've got 3 different color backdrops. One is a very light gray, this is a medium gray, and one is black. I found the medium gray works the best for my furniture. And now I've got my dandy lift and I'm moving this sideboard around so I can get it positioned exactly where I want it for the shooting, and then I'll lower it in place and set up my lights. Alright, needs to come a little bit to the right. Now I'm going to set up my lights. I use 2 photographic light boxes on stands. Each box has a 1000 watt incandescent bulb. Okay, that's one reflector. Now the idea with these light boxes is to make the light come from a very large planar source instead of from a point source. A point source would be like a flashlight. And point sources always make a big reflective glare. It makes the light very stark. A lot of reflection, a lot of very sharp corners, shadows that is, from corners. And really, you want to mute the shadows. You want them to be gradual or, in some cases, non-existent. But you definitely don't want stark shadows like you might get on a very sunny day. So the light box takes the sunny day and turns it into a cloudy day where the light is nice and evenly dispersed coming from all directions. Now I do my own photography mostly because the furniture is so heavy, so awkward, and so difficult to take to a photography studio that I pretty much just have to set up the studio right here. And so I've learned to do my photography myself. Now these setups are not that expensive either. I think that backdrop paper runs something like $40, $45 a roll. I went ahead and got a special mechanism so I could roll that up on the overhead there. I can't recall exactly how much that cost. I think I bought these light boxes, the set, for $350 or so. They come in a variety of prices. By the way, here's the bulb. It's a tungsten bulb. It's 1000 watt. You can see the filament running the full length. These get hot, so a lot of people call them hot lights. And the reflector has a little trap door built into the top and the bottom for the heat to escape. Because these will get hot. Now, right now you've got a point source of a bulb inside a big reflector. In order to diffuse that light nice and evenly, you place a piece of this translucent nylon cloth over the outside of the box. Now this particular set comes with 2 of these nylons. You can put one inside and then one outside. But because I have a really big piece I'm shooting, I have a lot of area, I need to get as many lumens as I can on the surface. So I'm just going to use one, just the outer cloth, and we'll see how that works. It should be just fine. Get a couple extension cords. And you may have noticed I wore a rubber glove to put those light bulbs on. They get so hot that I don't want the oil from my hands getting onto the light bulb and causing a place that would be, disturb the temperature profile and cause a crack in the glass. I'm not sure if that's necessary on these particular lights, but I've just gotten into the habit of doing this. So these throw a pretty decent amount of light, and you can see how evenly the light is distributed around the entire cloth. That's the whole idea. So you don't have a point source, you have a very wide distribution, just like on a cloudy day. Okay, next step is to put shades on the windows. Now it's a cloudy day out today. It looks like it's about to rain, so I'm probably not really going to need shades. But I'm going to go ahead and do that anyway, just because I want the light to be only from my lights, not anything from outside, especially if we get lightning right during the middle of a shoot. I've got a large shade for my big front door and two smaller shades for the windows that are right adjacent to the shooting area.
Now you can see the basic setup. I have the two light boxes pointing down at the sideboard, which is centered fairly well on the backdrop. You can see I've got shades over my main door and the two windows down by the sideboard, and all my interior lights are turned off. My camera is ready to set up, and we'll get to that next.
When shooting in any kind of light with a digital camera, you have to help the camera compensate for color correction. And by that I mean tungsten lights have a lot of red in them, as opposed to daylight or electronic strobe lights, which are much more towards the blue spectrum. Well, the camera's confused. It doesn't really know the difference between these colors, and you have to sort of teach it. Now, there is an automatic function in these cameras called automatic white balancing, where the camera's trying to tell itself what white is, and if it knows what white is, then it can compare all the other colors to that white to get your colors looking right on the photograph. But I prefer to use a method called manual white balancing, where I actually put a piece of white paper underneath these lights, point the camera at it, and tell the camera, hey, this is white. And that way, there's just no question that the camera is going to properly process the photographs and get the color pretty close to what they should be. So, I simply take a piece of white sketch pad. I'm sure I could pay a lot of money for some special photographic white thing, but white sketch pad works pretty darn good. And I'm just going to go ahead and in the lighting that I'm using for the photograph, I'm going to set my camera to do manual white balancing. I'm going to take the lens cap off, point the camera at the white, push the shutter, and say, hey, this is white. And now the camera's happy. My photograph should show with the correct coloration.
Now, before we get going, I just want to show you the setup with the camera. I'm using a Pentax camera that I bought a few years ago. It's a K200. That's not real important, but what is important is 10 megapixels. And the reason I picked a large, well, at the time it was large anyway, 10 megapixel camera was because the current camera, the one I'm actually shooting this video with, is only a 4.1 megapixel, and the prints that you could make were not large enough to use in books and magazines. You need a camera where there's enough pixels that you can print at 300 pixels per inch, or dots per inch that would be, and still have a size 8 by 10 or so that you could use in a magazine or a book, because after all, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get our photographs published. So this is a single lens reflex camera, 10 megapixels. It's not a terribly expensive camera, but it does do a good job, and I can adjust to many things, and I prefer to shoot this camera in in the P mode where I'm able to adjust my aperture and shutter speed, but I also use automatic processing. Now this camera will also shoot in what's called RAW, which means the computer on the camera does no processing in RAW, and you've got to do all the color correction and so forth at your computer. Well, I found with this particular camera that the automatic color processing and so forth is just as good as the RAW for my purposes, and it sure saves me a lot of time. I've got this on a tripod. It happens to be the tripod that I've been using for all the videos I've shot, so while I'm doing the photography of the sideboard, I'll be planting my little video camera here on a box. Sorry about that, but it should work out well. And the camera is pointed over here at the subject of the photography. Now I've put a little more reflective material over there to the left to try and throw a little more reflected light onto that left side, so we'll see how that looks. Remember, everything is relative in photography. The entire image doesn't necessarily have to be as bright as it would be in the final product. As long as it's lighted evenly, then you can always just raise the lighting level on the computer, raise the lighting level of the whole thing. I'd also like to emphasize that more lights are not necessarily better in studio photography. Usually a couple lights, sometimes only one, maybe three at the most, are all you really should have. Otherwise you get too confused. Okay, I think I've cut down on some of that glare, so let's go ahead and take another shot there. You know, back in the days of film, I would take shots, black and white actually is what we used in the 80s, the early 80s, and I'd wait 2 weeks to see the results of one shoot. Now I can do multiple shots and within an hour have something that I like. Well, I've worked quite a bit with various lighting. The problem I'm having is trying to get the quilting to come out on the top. You typically can see that kind of figure with a raking light. So what I've done is I've taken one of my light boxes and put it very high over the top, illuminating the top well. Now I'm going to have to, on the computer, paint out the stand so it doesn't show up. I hate having to do that, but it's really all I can do in this configuration because I don't have a way to suspend the light. This other light box on the left, and you can just see it over the top of the saw here. That's illuminating the front, and I put a piece of reflector paper on the floor to try to throw a little light up onto the stretcher assembly on the left. Whereas on the right, I've actually installed my 250 watt bulb with a reflector to illuminate the right side, and I have another piece of reflector paper trying to throw some light up on the right side. So we'll see how that works. By the way, I put my camera on a 2-second time delay so that when I push the shutter I can step back, any jiggling in the camera settles out, and it makes a clearer shot. Also, I'm shooting at f/16 so that I can get good depth of field and keep the entire piece in focus. And the final thing I wanted to point out is, notice the backdrop paper curves up in the back from the horizontal to the vertical. That's important so you don't get a sharp line that would be distracting in the photograph. I usually shoot a half a dozen shots or so, maybe a little more, moving the lights around for each shot, sometimes maybe moving the camera forward or back, and then I come on over here to the computer with the flash drive from the camera, load them on in to the program, and see how they look. Now I'm using Corel Paint Shop Pro Photo X2, Paint Shop for short. This is a relatively inexpensive program with a lot of capability, and I've never had any problem using this
It really does a lot of things well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tile these photographs so I can get a little look at each one at a time, decide right off the bat which ones are bad. Okay, this is a bad photo here because it's too dark on the top, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that one out and not even use it. Okay, this one isn't too bad. That's one I might keep. And what I'll try to do is I'll try to compare a couple of photos side by side and keep the best of the two, and that way I can weed the field down to one or two really good photos. Okay, this one on the left has a lot of good light across the entire top, which is good. This one on the left is a little more glary on the right. You don't want to glare. You want to have a fairly even lighting distribution unless you're trying to go for some special effect. So of the two, I'm going to keep the one on the left. The one on the right, I'm going to go ahead and close out. And I'll just go through this process continually until I get what I'm looking for.